Hello and welcome to How to Econ. Today we will take a look at consumer choices, which is an important topic in microeconomics. Microeconomics seeks to understand the behavior of individual economic agents such as individuals and businesses. Generally, consumers are trying to get the most for their limited budget. In economic terms, they are trying to maximize total utility or satisfaction given their budget constraint. This chapter focuses on how consumers make choices about what goods and services to buy with their limited income. People's income puts a boundary on what they could buy. The possible combinations of two goods that are affordable given a consumer's limited income is called a budget constraint. The slope of a budget constraint is the price ratio of two products or services. The satisfaction derived from consumer choices is called total utility. Let's consider Jose's situation, shown on the screen here. He likes to collect t-shirts and watch movies. We show the quantity of t-shirts on the horizontal axis, while the quantity of movies on the vertical axis. Assume that Jose has a total of $56 to spend. The price of t-shirts is $14 each and the price of movies is $7 each. Notice that the vertical intercept of the budget constraint line is at 8 movies and 0 t-shirts. 8 movies is the maximum number of movies that Jose can watch with his $56 budget. The horizontal intercept of the budget constraint is 4, where Jose spends all of his money on t-shirts and no movies. The slope of the budget constraint is -8 divided by 4 is -2. The specific choices along the budget constraint line show the combinations of affordable t-shirts and movies. For example, at point S, Jose watches 6 movies and buys 1 t-shirt. At point Q, he only watches 2 movies, hence he can buy 3 t-shirts with the leftover money. Jose wishes to choose the combination that will provide him with the greatest utility or happiness. Each additional unit of consumption will provide some additional utility, which is called marginal utility or MU for short. Marginal utility equals change in total utility divided by change in quantity of consumption. Keep in mind that each marginal unit of a good consumed provides less of an additional to utility than the previous unit. This is what we call diminishing marginal utility. Diminishing marginal utility is an example of the more general law of diminishing returns. Here is an easy example of diminishing marginal utility. Imagine that you are very hungry and love pizza. If I give you 1 big slice of pizza to eat, you would be very happy to take it. Then I give you the second one. You probably could still be happy to eat it, but maybe not as eager as the first slice before, because you are less hungry after the first slice. If I give you the third slice, you might still eat it, but probably even less eager than the second slice because you are full already. So each slice of pizza might still make you happy, but not as much as the slice before. Marginal utility per dollar is the amount of additional utility Jose receives divided by the product's price. If Jose wants to maximize the utility he gets from his limited budget, he will always purchase the item with the greatest marginal utility per dollar of expenditure, assuming he can afford it with his remaining budget. Think about it as he will buy the item that gives him more bang for the buck. If a person always chooses the item with the greatest marginal utility per dollar spent, when the budget is exhausted, the utility maximizing choice should occur where the marginal utility per dollar spent is the same for both goods. There's another equivalent way to think about this. When we divide the price of good 1 by the price of good 2, at the utility maximizing point, this will equal the marginal utility of good 1 divided by the marginal utility of good 2. This means the ratio of the prices of the two goods should equal to the ratio of the marginal utilities at the utility maximizing point. The ratio of the marginal utilities is called marginal rate of substitution. It is the rate at which a person is willing to trade one good for another so that utility level will remain the same. Please keep in mind that along the budget constraint, the total price of the two goods remains the same, so the ratio of the prices does not change. However, the marginal utility of the two goods changes with the quantities consumed. This discussion of utility began with an assumption that it is possible to place numerical values on utility, which is an assumption that may seem questionable. While measuring utility with numbers is a convenient assumption to clarify the explanation, the key assumption is not that an outside party can measure utility, but only that individuals can decide which of two alternatives they prefer. The step-by-step process of choosing the highest level of utility per dollar spent resembles how many people make consumption decisions. We think about what will make us the happiest. We think about what things cost. We think about buying a little more of one item and giving up a little of something else. We choose what provides us with the greatest level of satisfaction. The vocabulary of comparing the points along a budget constraint and total and marginal utility is just a set of tools for discussing this everyday process in a clear and specific manner. When combinations of goods provide an equal level of utility or satisfaction, we say that they are on the same indifference curve or utility curve. On a graph, indifference curves have a roughly similar shape in two ways. First, they are downward sloping from left to right. The downward slope of the indifference curve means that a person must trade off less of one good to get more of the other, while holding utility constant. Second, they are convex with respect to the origin. In other words, they are steeper on the left and flatter on the right. The reason behind this shape involves diminishing marginal utility, which is the notion that as a person consumes more of a good, the marginal utility from each additional unit becomes lower. The slope along an indifference curve is the marginal rate of substitution, which is the rate at which a person is willing to trade one good for another so that utility will remain the same. Higher indifference curves represent a greater level of utility than lower ones. The graph on the screen illustrates some indifference curves of Lily, who has to make trade-offs between buying donuts and books. All of the choices or combinations of donuts and books on the indifference curve UH are preferred to all of the choices on the indifference curves UM, which in turn are preferred to all of the choices on UL. People seek the highest level of utility. That means they wish to be on the highest possible indifference curve. However, they are limited by their budget constraints. Let's take a look at the example of Lily, who has $60 to spend on either books or donuts. Books cost $6 each. Donuts are 50 cents each. Lily maximizes her utility when the marginal utility per dollar spent is the same for both books and donuts. If we switch the positions of marginal utility of donut and price of book in the red equation on the screen, we will get the blue equation in which the ratio of the marginal utilities or marginal rate of substitution is on the left and the ratio of prices is on the right. Remember that the slope of the budget constraint is determined by the relative price of the two products or the ratio of prices. So the blue equation means Lily's optimal option must be the point where the indifference curve tangent with the budget constraint. It is represented by point B on the graph, where Lily will buy 3 books and 8 to 4 donuts. Let's take a look at a few other points to help you understand this kind of graph a little more. The combination of books and donuts at point A gives Lily the same level of happiness as the combination of books and donuts at point B. However, because point A is above the budget constraint, which means it is not affordable for Lily to buy 2 books and 120 donuts. The combination of books and donuts at point F would make Lily happier than at point B because point F is on a higher indifference curve, which represents higher utility level. However, point F is also above her budget constraint, so it is not affordable. The combinations of books and donuts at points H and G are affordable because they are below or on the budget constraint. However, they both belong to a lower indifference curve, which represents lower utility level or happiness than point B. Just as we can use utility and marginal utility to discuss making consumer choices along a budget constraint, we can also use these ideas to think about how consumer choices change when the budget constraint shifts in response to changes in income or price. Let's begin with an example illustrating how changes in income level affect consumer choices. The figure on the screen shows a budget constraint that represents Kimberly's choice between concert tickets at $50 each and getting away overnight to a bed and breakfast for $200 per night. Kimberly has $1,000 per year to spend between these two choices. So the maximum number of concerts that Kimberly could see is 20 concerts with 0 overnight stay. Or she could stay for maximum 5 nights without seeing any concert. After applying the decision rule that the ratio of the marginal utilities to the prices should equal between the two products, Kimberly chooses point M with 8 concerts and 3 overnight getaways as her utility maximizing choice. Now, assume that the income Kimberly has to spend on these two items rises to $2,000 per year. If she spends all her budget on concert tickets, she could buy 40 tickets with $2,000. But if she spends all her budget on overnight staying, she could stay for 10 nights. So the new income causes her budget constraint to shift out to the right. In graphical terms, the new budget constraint will now be tangent to a higher indifference curve, representing a higher level of utility. On the other hand, a reduction in income will cause the budget constraint to shift to the left, which will cause it to be tangent to a lower indifference curve, representing a reduced level of utility. Depending on Kimberly's preferences, a rise in income could cause consumption of one good to increase while consumption of the other good declines. A choice like P means that a rise in income caused her quantity consumed of overnight stays to decline, while a choice like Q would mean that a rise in income caused her quantity of concerts to decline, compared with point M. Goods where demand declines as income rises, or conversely where the demand rises as income falls, are called inferior goods. An inferior good occurs when people trim back on a good as income rises because they can now afford a more expensive choices that they prefer. For example, a higher income household might eat fewer hamburgers or be less likely to buy a used car and instead eat more steak and buy a new car. Since personal preferences and the shape of indifference curves are different for each individual, the response to changes in income will be different too. For example, consider the preferences of Manuel and Natasha in Figure A and Figure B. They each start with an identical income of $40, which they spend on yogurts that cost $1 per cup and rental movies that cost $4 each. Thus, they face identical budget constraints. However, based on Manuel's preferences as revealed by his indifference curves, his utility maximizing choice on the original budget set occurs where his opportunity set is tangent to the highest possible indifference curve at W with 3 movies and 28 yogurts, while Natasha's utility maximizing choice on the original budget set at point Y will be 7 movies and 12 yogurts. Assume that their income increased to $60. So now Manuel will choose point X where he has 7 movies and 32 yogurts. For Natasha, she will choose point Z where she has 8 movies and 28 yogurts. That is, Manuel will choose to spend most of the extra income on movies. Natasha will choose to spend most of the extra income on yogurt. In this way, the indifference curve approach allows for a range of possible responses. However, if both goods are normal goods, then the typical response to a higher level of income will be to purchase more of them, although exactly how much more is a matter of personal preferences. For analyzing the possible effect of a change in price on consumption, let's again use a concrete example. The figure on the screen represents Henry's consumer choice, who chooses between purchasing baseball bats and cameras. A price increase for baseball bats would have no effect on the ability to purchase cameras, but it would reduce the number of bats Henry could afford to buy. Thus, a price increase for baseball bats, the good on the horizontal axis, causes the budget constraint to rotate inward as if on a hinge from the vertical axis. On the other hand, a price decrease for baseball bats would cause the budget constraint to rotate outward from the vertical axis. The new possible choices could be fewer baseball bats and more cameras, like point H, or less of both goods, as at point J. Choice K would mean that the higher price of bats led to exactly the same quantity of bat consumption but fewer cameras. Possibly, but unlikely, it could be choice L, since it would mean a higher price for bats lead to a greater consumption of bats. The typical response to higher prices is that a person chooses to consume less of the product with the higher price. This occurs for 2 reasons, and both effects can occur simultaneously. The substitution effect occurs when a price changes and consumers have an incentive to consume less of the good with a relatively higher price and more of the good with a relatively lower price. The income effect is that a higher price means the buying power of income has been reduced, even though actual income has not changed, which leads to buying less of the good when the good is normal. In this example, the higher price for baseball bats would cause Henry to buy fewer bats for both reasons. But exactly how much will a higher price for bats cause Henry's bat consumption to fall? The graph suggests a range of possibilities. Henry might react to a higher price for baseball bats by purchasing the same quantity of bats but cutting his camera consumption. This choice is point K on the new budget constraint, straight below the original choice M. Alternatively, Henry might react by dramatically reducing his bat purchases and instead buying more cameras. And that could be point H. Another option is that Henry might buy less of both cameras and baseball bats, and that could be point J. Using indifference curves, you can illustrate the substitution and income effects on a graph. In this figure, Ogden faces a choice between 2 goods, haircuts or pizzas. Haircuts cost $20 and pizzas cost $6 each, and he has $120 to spend. The price of haircuts rises to $30 each time. Ogden starts at a choice A. After the price of haircuts increases, he chooses point B on the lower indifference curve. Point B with 2 haircuts and 10 pizzas is immediately below point A with 3 haircuts and 10 pizzas, showing that Ogden reacts to a higher price of haircuts by cutting back only on haircuts, while leaving his consumption of pizza unchanged. The dashed line in the diagram and point C are used to separate the substitution effect and the income effect. To understand their function, start by thinking about the substitution effect with this question. How would Ogden change his consumption if the relative prices of the two goods changed, but this change in relative prices did not affect his utility? The slope of the budget constraint is determined by the relative price of the two goods. Thus, the slope of the original budget line is determined by the original relative prices, while the slope of the new budget line is determined by the new relative prices. With this thought in mind, the dashed line is a graphical tool inserted in a specific way. It is inserted so that it is parallel with the new budget constraint, so it reflects the new relative prices. But it is tangent to the original indifference curve, so it reflects the original level of utility or buying power. Therefore, the movement from the original choice point A to point C is a substitution effect. It shows the choice that Ogden could make if relative prices shift, as shown by the different slope between the original budget set and the dashed line. But if buying power did not shift, as shown by being tangent to the original indifference curve, the substitution effect will encourage people to shift away from the good which has become relatively more expensive and toward the good which has become relatively less expensive, in this case, the pizza. The two arrows labeled with S for substitution effect on each axis show the direction for this movement. The income effect is the movement from point C to point B, which shows how Ogden reacts to a reduction in his buying power from the higher indifference curve to the lower indifference curve, but holding constant the relative prices, because the dashed line has the same slope as the new budget constraint. In this case, where the price of one good increases, buying power is reduced, so the income effect means that consumption of both goods should fall if they are both normal goods, which is reasonable to assume unless there is reason to believe otherwise. The two arrows labeled with I for income effect, one on each axis, show the direction of this income effect movement. Now put the substitution and income effects together. When the price of haircuts increases, Ogden consumes less of it for two reasons shown in the exhibit. The substitution effect of the higher price led him to consume less, and the income effect of the higher price also led him to consume less. The size of this income and substitution effects will differ from person to person depending on individual preferences. For example, if Ogden's substitution effect away from haircut and toward pizza is especially strong and outweighs the income effect, then a higher price for haircut might lead to increased consumption of pizza. This case could be drawn on the graph so that the point of tangency between the new budget constraint and the relevant indifference curve occur below point B and to the right. Conversely, if the substitution effect away from haircuts and toward pizza is not as strong, and the income effect is relatively stronger, then Ogden will be more likely to react to the higher price of haircuts by consuming less of both goods. In this case, his optimal choice after the price change will be above and to the left of choice B on the new budget constraint. Although the substitution and income effects are often discussed as a sequence of events, it should be remembered that they are twin components of a single cause, a change in price. Despite the fact that you can analyze them separately, the two effects are always proceeding hand in hand, happening at the same time. Changes in the price of a good lead the budget constraint to rotate. A rotation in the budget constraint means that when individuals are seeking their highest utility, the quantity that is demanded of that good will change. In this way, the logical foundations of demand curves, which show a connection between prices and quantity demanded, are based on the underlying idea of individuals seeking utility. Let's take a look at an example. The graph on top shows a budget constraint with a choice between housing and everything else. We label the preferred choice on the original budget constraint that provides the highest possibility utility M0. The other three budget constraints represent successively higher prices for housing of price P1, P2, and P3. As the price of housing rises, the budget constraint rotates in and in and in again. We label the utility maximizing choices M1, M2, and M3. And the quantity demanded of housing falls from Q0 to Q1, Q2, and Q3, with the assumption ceteris paribus, meaning with all other things being the same. We graph this relationship of the price of housing rises while the quantity of housing demanded falling on the demand curve in the second graph B. The vertical dashed show that the quantity of housing demanded at each point is the same in both upper and lower graphs. We ultimately determine the shape of a demand curve by the underlying choices about maximizing utility subject to a budget constraint. While economists may not be able to measure happiness or utility levels, they can certainly measure price and quantity demanded. The budget constraint framework for making utility maximizing choices offers a reminder that people can react to a change in price or income in a range of different ways. For instance, when the government imposes taxes on certain products, such as on gasoline, cigarettes, and alcohol. Say that a tax on alcohol leads to a higher price at the liquor store. The higher price of alcohol causes the budget constraint to pivot left, and alcoholic beverage consumption is likely to decrease. However, people may also react to the higher price of alcoholic beverages by cutting back on other purchases, such as appetizers at restaurants like chicken wings and nachos. It would be unwise to assume that the liquor industry is the only one affected by the tax on alcoholic beverages. Another example could be a program providing a fixed amount of money per child to every family, regardless of family income. Traditionally, the child allowance had been distributed to families by withholding less in taxes from the paycheck of the family wage earner, typically the father in this time period. The new policy instead provides the child allowance as a cash payment to the mother. As a result of this change, households have the same level of income and face the same prices in the market, but the money is more likely to be in the mother's purse than in the father's wallet. Should this change in policy alter household consumption patterns? Basic models of consumption decisions that we examined in this chapter assume that it does not matter whether the mother or the father receives the money, because both parents seek to maximize the family's utility as a whole. In effect, this model assumes that everyone in the family has the same preferences. In reality, the share of that the father or mother controls does affect what the household consumes. When the mother controls a large share of family income, a number of studies in the United Kingdom and in a wide variety of other countries have found that the family tends to spend more on food and childcare and less on alcohol and tobacco. As the mother controls a larger share of household resources, children's health improves too. These findings suggest that when providing assistance to poor families in high-income countries and low-income countries alike, the monetary amount of assistance is not all that matters. It also matters which family member actually receives the money. So that's it for now. Thanks for listening. See you in the next video.